Federation of the Deaf meets every 4 years so that people from all over the world can exchange research and information in fields related to deafness. The 7th World Congress of the World Federation of the Deaf met at the Washington Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. from July 31st to August 8th, 1975. This was the first Congress to be held in the United States. The National Association of the Deaf sponsored the meeting with the help of a grant from the Social and Rehabilitation Service of the United States Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. The theme of the Congress was full citizenship for all deaf people. Organizational meetings were held during the opening days of the Congress. The General Assembly, like the United Nations, is made up of delegates from each member nation. The General Assembly approved the WFD work program for the next 4 years. To organize a special international conference on communication problems of the deaf. To work on a plan to publish an encyclopedia of deafness. To help interested people get scholarships for study to become specialists on deafness. To work on establishing an international youth center for the deaf. The General Assembly voted to hold the 8th World Congress in Sofia, Bulgaria in 1979. The WFD Bureau re-elected its chief officers to serve for the next 4 years. The Caption Center asked Dr. Vukotic, the president of the World Federation of the Deaf, how the organization has changed since he took office in 1955. At the opening ceremonies of the Congress, there was a parade of the flags of the member nations. The delegations were welcomed to the United States. Bernard Bragg of the National Theater of the Deaf signed the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
It is not likely that all the clever strategies...
Stanley Thomas, Assistant Secretary for Human Development at HEW, was the keynote speaker.
Distorted perceptions of deaf people and their abilities is one of the many substantial problems which deaf people share in common with other groups of vulnerable people. By reason of their dependency, groups such as children and youth, the elderly, the handicapped, and others are forced to rely for support and assistance on their families, communities, and/or service institutions. While many government and private programs have been created to serve their needs, too often the focus of these programs has been on their dependency rather than on freeing their human potential.
Dr. Richard Kinney, a deaf and blind writer and educator, also spoke.
I bring greetings and warm good wishes to the 7th World Congress of the International Federation of the Deaf from the World Council for the Welfare of the Blind. Two groups that make up in brain power for anything we may lack in eye or ear power. Our organizations have much in common. Both are worldwide and include people of many nations, races, and creeds. Both of us know that a blind person can do anything that a seeing person can do except see, and that a deaf person can do anything that a hearing person can do except hear. Both of us are working for the day in which the deaf and the blind will achieve equal rights and equal opportunities in order that we may make equal contributions to our nations and the world. President Boris Zeman of the World Council for the Welfare of the Blind has asked me to pledge our full cooperation as we strive together toward this goal.
There were interpreters at every meeting of the Congress to translate the discussions into the many spoken and manual languages of the international delegates. 2 interpreters at the front of each room translated lectures and discussions into international and American Sign Language. Interpreters in booths translated all meetings into spoken French and English. These are the 2 official languages of the WFD. Hearing people in the audience listened to these translations with earphones. Some of the hearing people then translated the speeches into the sign language of their own countrymen. The difficulty of international communication demonstrated the need for the development of an accepted international sign language. Justuno, the Dictionary of International Sign Language, was introduced at a meeting of the Commission on Communications. The dictionary was agreed on and adopted by the Unification of Signs Commission of the WFD. Justuno contains a total of 1,500 words. Signs from many countries were compared, and the signs that seemed most natural and clear were chosen for Justuno. The meaning of each sign is written in both French and English, and signs are explained by symbols for people who are not familiar with either written language. The Congress delegates attended meetings of the 9 permanent commissions of the World Federation of the Deaf. Experts in many different fields talked about the most recent developments in deafness research and technology and in social and educational services for the deaf. In the Communications Commission, Robert Lauritsen of the St. Paul, Minnesota Technical Vocational Institute emphasized the need for interpreters trained in Amislan. Deaf people who are naturally the most skilled in Amislan were urged to participate in the interpreter training. Malcolm Norwood, chief of captioned films and telecommunications for HEW, said that captions are the best way of communicating with deaf people through the media. He said that captioned films have had a profound effect on the lifestyles of deaf people. telecommunications devices for the deaf were also discussed in meetings of the Commission on Communications. A panel discussion of such devices was conducted by TTY with the help of a satellite. One of the panelists was in Sweden. 2 others were in California. Participants in Washington followed the historic discussion on a TV phone. Julius Sami of Iran suggested to the Commission on Psychology that a new sign language literature be developed to be recorded on film and videotape. At the closing ceremony, the Commission asked each member country of the WFD to bring a folk story to the next Congress in 1979. The development of this literature will encourage deaf people to explore, enjoy, and respect the sign language. Dr. Charles Solly, an ear surgeon from Uganda, said that African people must be made aware that deaf people should not be considered mentally deficient. He said that millet, a grain, has caused deafness in some Africans because it was not properly prepared. He emphasized the need for early diagnosis of deafness in children. Parents should be told to observe their young children to see if they react properly to sounds. Dr. Solly said that there are only a few schools for the deaf in Africa. There is a need, he said, for help from countries which are more advanced. The Commission on Technical Assistance to the Deaf in Developing Countries stressed the need for international attention to the problems of the deaf. At the Commission on Pedagogy, Dr. Gerald Gustafson and Rosalind Rosen of Gallaudet College spoke on the deaf child's right to communicate. Dr. Gustafson said that deaf children have the right to learn the language of their environment and to use any method of communication with which they are comfortable. It is difficult for deaf children to learn a full language from lip reading, she said, because some lip movements are too small for young children to see. Also, many sounds look the same on some people's lips. Ms. Rosen said that signs are easy to see, that they can clearly show a speaker's emotions and attitudes. She urged teachers and parents to respect all forms of communications. The Subcommission on Parent Participation was a division of the Pedagogy Commission. Roy Holcomb, a deaf parent and educator, expressed the need for people to let the deaf be deaf. He added, "We have a responsibility to show parents of newly detected deaf kids that they are not alone." The Pedagogy Commission asked the World Federation of the Deaf to establish a full Parents Commission at the next WFD conference. At the closing ceremony, Dr. Luther Robinson, president of the Medical Commission, affirmed the right of all deaf people to a full range of health services. There is a need, he said, for doctors and health workers to become more familiar with deafness. More deaf people should be encouraged to work in the medical field. Early in the week, Mrs. Ronnie Fisher, a registered nurse, spoke to the Commission about the licensed vocational nurse training program for deaf students at Los Angeles Trade Technical College. The first LVN class will graduate in June 1976. All of the students have already been promised jobs. Frank Hockman, the first deaf person to be accepted by an American medical school, said that deaf people have traditionally been employed in low-paying jobs in medical fields. Deaf people have not been advised to look for higher-paying jobs. Hockman said that deaf people must demand training for better jobs. Carl Aguila of the Philippines told the Commission on Social Aspects of Deafness that life is difficult for deaf people in developing countries. He said that the quality of education is not good and that there are not many jobs available. He said that the Philippines has established the first organization for the deaf in Southeast Asia, but he thinks that the group would be able to help the deaf more if it were controlled by deaf people. Dr. Pierre Gorman of Australia spoke to the Commission about the special problems which old age causes for deaf people. He said that when elderly deaf people lose their teeth, it becomes more difficult to speak properly because there is less vibration in a mouth with fewer teeth. He urged deaf people to have good dental care throughout their lives. The Social Aspects Commission asked the World Federation of the Deaf to develop a questionnaire to collect international information on the problems of the deaf in education, employment, and social security. The Commission suggested that the WFD publish a bulletin on the legal rights of deaf people and that the WFD begin a journal of information on social rehabilitation problems in member nations. A new subcommission on the deaf-blind was also suggested. The Commission on Vocational Rehabilitation recommended that all member nations establish properly staffed counseling centers for the deaf in major cities. It was also suggested that the sign language of the deaf be taught in schools for the hearing. The Commission asked that the United Nations and the International Labor Organization should keep the deaf involved in international conferences about job placement. The Commission on Spiritual Care urged all religious organizations to provide religious leaders and complete training for clergy so that deaf people will not be excluded from religious activities and worship. The Commission on Arts and Culture discussed the contributions of deaf people to all the lively arts. Deaf people should be encouraged to fulfill their desires to paint, dance, act, and express themselves through the arts. An international panel on theater discussed the differences in the communication methods used by various theater groups. Some rely on mime, some on sign language, and some on combinations of sign and mime. Gunilla Wagström of the Swedish Tyst Theater described their form of visual theater, which can be acted equally well by deaf or hearing actors. The Tyst productions use a kind of body language and are designed to entertain deaf audiences and to educate hearing people about deafness. In the evenings, Congress participants were entertained by deaf theater and dance groups from all around the world. The Polish Mime Theater presented programs entitled Apocalypsa and Caprichos. The German theater performed Faust. The American hearing group Rock Gospel sang and signed popular gospel songs. Israel's Dimama dance group performed a modern mime ballet called Touches and Conflicts. The Swedish Tyst Theater presented dramas to describe the life of deaf people in Sweden. The National Theater of the Deaf performed the Jewish folk tale, The Dybbuk, and the comedy piece, Priscilla, Princess of Power. The exhibition hall of the World Congress was filled with booths displaying information on deafness and services to the deaf. There were telephone communication devices, T-shirts, books, and teaching aids on display. Films by and about deaf people were shown. Deaf artists and craftspeople from many countries displayed their artwork. On Tuesday, August 5th, Gallaudet College hosted a convocation for the World Congress. Vice President Nelson Rockefeller was the main speaker. He said that deaf people should have the chance to reach their full human potential. He said the United States government needs the benefit of deaf people's opinions, ideas, knowledge, energies, and imagination. He said that the society must have the wisdom not to waste the talents of deaf people. The first Powery V. Doctor medallions for international service were presented at the convocation to Quota International, a woman's professional organization, and to Thomas H. Sutcliffe, a deaf priest from Great Britain, and to Fritz Geisberger, a teacher of the deaf in West Germany. Dr. Powery V. Doctor was a member of the Gallaudet College faculty for 40 years. He was internationally known for his contributions to deaf education. Quota International was cited for creating public awareness of deafness with its Shatter Silence program. It was also cited for offering fellowships for study at Gallaudet College. Thomas Sutcliffe was honored for his contributions to the spiritual, social, and educational welfare of the deaf in Great Britain. Fritz Geisberger was honored for introducing manual communication to the schools of West Germany. WFD President Vukotic led the closing ceremonies of the 7th World Congress of the Deaf. At the ceremonies, each commission delivered a final report. Then Dr. Vukotic and Dr. Magarotto presented International Solidarity Merit Awards to the National Association of the Deaf and to Gallaudet College. A special award was given posthumously to Dr. Powery V. Doctor. It was an emotional moment for many people as Dr. Edward Merrill, president of Gallaudet, accepted the award for Dr. Powery Doctor. The main speaker at the closing ceremony was Jack Ashley, the only deaf member of the British Parliament. He said that the World Congress will tell the world that the deaf will not accept discrimination anymore. Ashley said that deaf people should create a Bill of Rights for the deaf, which will guarantee freedom, dignity, and equality for all of the deaf people in the world. Ashley said that all of the good plans of the commissions will not help the deaf if the deaf people do not first work to help themselves. Jess Smith, the president of the National Association of the Deaf, presented the WFD flag to the next host country, Bulgaria. And Frederick Schreiber, the executive secretary of the NAD, then officially closed the Congress. The World Federation of the Deaf hopes to use the information and research collected in the commissions to establish a databank for the worldwide distribution of developments in each field. Funds for the World Federation of the Deaf have been very limited, and the fiscal problem has reduced the ability of the WFD to function effectively between world congresses. Limited funds for newsletters and other publications have made sharing the information gleaned at the congresses difficult. The WFD hopes to increase its financial support from government grants and from continuing work with the United Nations on projects about deafness and the expanded efforts to develop international sign language. If the financial problems can be solved, the World Federation of the Deaf will then be able to be more effective in sharing its resources to help deaf people all over the world.